We're going to turn now to Libya and the ongoing investigation of that deadly attack at the US consulate in Benghazi. We are learning more and seeing exactly what happened during the final hours of Ambassador Christopher Stevens' life. Our Awa Damon is in Benghazi. She's spoken with a man who recorded part of it on his cell phone.
This is the first thing that Fahad says he saw and filmed at the consulate compound. The cafeteria building up in flames. It was shortly before midnight, September 11th. The smoke so thick, the compound's main house is barely visible. And then this. After breaking through a window, men shout they have found a body. Suddenly, one of them cries out, "He's alive! He's alive!" The crowd cheers, "God is great!" Rushing for a car, they realize it's a foreigner. I was filming the video and I thought it was an American, Fahad recalls, but I thought it was a driver or a security guy. I never thought it was the ambassador. It's clear from the rest of the video that the man they pulled out was Ambassador Christopher Stevens. Fahad says he was alive, but barely. He had a pulse, and his eyes were moving, Fahad says. His mouth was black from all the smoke. 10 minutes later, rushed through the Benghazi streets in a civilian's car, the ambassador arrived at the hospital. But it was too late. Dr. Ziad Abu Zaid tells us he got a code blue call. Patient arrested, needs resuscitation.
No pulse. No breathing.
He too did not realize it was Stevens. The body was covered in soot, he says. I began resuscitation, but after 45 minutes, the patient gave no signs of life. The Libyan government has vowed to bring those who attacked the consulate to justice. But nearly a week later, there are still contradictory accounts of what happened. The head of Libya's National Congress, Mohammed al-Mgarief, says it was a pre-planned attack, that the government has arrested dozens of people, among them members or sympathizers of al-Qaeda, and a handful of foreigners. Other senior officials say the 50 were merely brought in for questioning, and there is no evidence of an existing plot. What is undisputed is that over the past 3 months, attacks against Western interests in Benghazi have increased, as has the power of extremist groups. Something military officials say they warned the Americans about. This young man says he arrived at the compound just as the firefight began to subside. He says he didn't see any foreigners, just Libyans, members of known extremist militias, bearded, carrying Russian-made automatic machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and lighter weapons. He was detained by the attackers and says he heard them talking about the assault, celebrating their success. And he says before he was released, they also talked about an attack on another location that night, a safe house where the American staff took shelter. Perhaps we'll never know exactly what happened that night, but it's a far cry from the dreams of so many Libyans when they rose up last year.
And Awa joins us now live from Benghazi. Awa, you know, it's interesting. They found the ambassador alive, it would appear, and they took him to a hospital. You know, it makes that point that we've been saying that, you know, people in Libya are not calling for death to America, most of them anyway. There is a love for what America did during the revolution.
There most certainly is, Michael, and just about every single Libyan that I have spoken to has been trying to underscore just how troubled, upset, disgusted they are by what took place at the embassy, really wanting the international community, especially the U.S. public, to know that this most certainly is not an indication of any sort of widespread sentiment across the country. What they do also want to see take place, though, is that for the Libyan government, with outside assistance, if required, somehow rein in these extremist militias, because at this point in time, Michael, the Libyan government in and of itself acknowledges very openly that it is incapable of controlling these various groups, and they have been asking the U.S. and other allies for some sort of help so that this sort of an act of violence does not happen once again.
Yeah, now the worrying thing, and you touched on this in your story, these extremist groups getting a foothold, which in turn speaks to the inability of the government to secure the country. There is no sort of infrastructure of security, and so they essentially are co-opting militias from the revolution in various places to run law and order. What is it that the Libyan government wants that they're not getting from the international community in terms of taking control?
Well, Michael, this speaks to a lot of the challenges that Libya is currently facing, bearing in mind that this is a nation that effectively had all of its institutions destroyed after the revolution. They effectively crumbled. It is a nation that has to be built from scratch. There is a phenomenally weak central government, and there is no true governmental security apparatus to speak of. The police force, the military, any sort of groups that exist within the government's so-called base of power are really made up of these revolutionary forces that, rather than be fully absorbed into the government security forces, have yes been brought underneath their authority, but these groups still operate as independent entities. And this has allowed the minority of groups that did exist with a more Islamist agenda to gain more power and thrive, because there is no central authority. There is, at this point in time, no one that is really going to hold them accountable for their actions, and they quite openly state that they can take on any other brigade, any other unit that the government chooses to throw in their direction to try to force them to lay down their weapons. What the government wants to see is growing support from the international community. And when it comes to the bare basics of institution building, from security forces to a justice system, but also, if necessary, things like training, things like equipping, but also things like trying to somehow establish more of a nationalistic sense amongst these individuals and not a sense of each unit for its own.
Yeah, I know that there's a sense there that unlike Iraq, unlike Afghanistan, international interests, let's say, waned after Gaddafi fell. Awa, thanks for your reporting from there. Extraordinary as always. Awa Damon there in Benghazi.